In this video, we're going to build a to-do list application, an application that simply saves your to-do list items. If you like these application-based videos, go ahead and click the like button now and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Let's take a look at the app. I've got the app running here on my local server that's running right in the folder. You can see I ran that with the Python command, python-m simple HTTP server running on port 8000. It's always better to run these off of a server than to simply load the files off of a drive. A lot of times if you're using external libraries, you're going to find things don't work if you just load the files off of a drive. So we're going to use our internal server. So the to-do list app is very simple. We simply add items like buy bananas, and they appear at the bottom. Call mom and dad, buy tickets to the game, and that's simple. They're added to the list. We can delete any of the items and go back and add more. Return library books. And there you can see right here. What's actually happening is these items are being stored in a part of the browser's DOM called local storage. If we go ahead and take a look at our developer tools, we can actually see them in local storage. And let me make that just a little bit bigger. So I'm in the application section of local storage, and I went to this particular local storage, this host, localhost 8000, and you can see here key items, and then there's a bunch of values here. Buy tickets to the game, return library books. So you're having a look inside essentially what's the browser's memory. So let's add one more item here. Buy new socks and underwear. And you can see it was added right here. So we're manipulating this object here inside the browser's memory called local storage. That's how it works. Pretty straightforward. We can close that. So now that you know how this very simple app works, let's take a look at the code. So let's go ahead and open up our code here. I'm using the Atom text editor, ATOM. And first off, notice we've got essentially here 4 code files. The README doesn't matter. We've got our index.html, which is a short HTML file. We've got lockr.js, which is a library I'm using to wrap local storage. This code I didn't write and we won't be going over. I simply downloaded it from the lockr.js GitHub and read the documentation. We've got a short CSS file. And the JavaScript, which is the heart of the actual application, which only runs a little over 60 lines. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, as far as libraries that I'm using Onsen UI, and I'm using lockr.js. Let's take a quick look in the browser. So Onsen UI, which is onsen.io. This is a great library for making mobile applications with HTML5 and CSS because it creates the individual elements on your screen and it draws them to look like a mobile device. So it looks like a mobile app. So this is Onsen UI, and it's a fairly well documented library. And you can see here are all of the different elements. I've used the list element here. I've used the text area element and the button element from this. And I simply looked up the documentation after implementing the library and used the code right from here. Very, very easy. So here you can see this is the Onsen text area, the Onsen button, and then this is the list here with the trash can icon. Looks better when you display it like a mobile app. All right, so let's start with the HTML. So here's our doc type declaration, which simply says that we are coding in HTML. That's line 1. The HTML formally starts on line 2. And here we've got our HTML opening tag declaring we're going to be writing in English and that we're left to right. Our text is read left to right. Neither of those attributes is really required. I'm actually not sure why the template inside Atom includes them, but they're there, so there's no reason to take them out. Then we have our meta tag indicating that we're using the UTF-8 character set. The title of our document is to-do list. Now, a lot of this here in the head section of the document is simply links to external style sheets and JavaScript code. So these two links are the Onsen UI style sheets, and I just picked that up from the documentation. Now, of course, when you're in production, you may want to download the entire library and package it along with your app. So this way, if there's any type of interruption in the network, it still loads all the components. Here, if the internet went down or we didn't have a network connection on our device, this actually wouldn't load the components correctly and our application wouldn't look right at all. Then we've got a link to my style sheet, to-do.css, which is simply just adding some space to a couple of the components, the button and the text area, adding a margin and a width. Then we have the Onsen JavaScript portion. And then we have the lockr.js. And again, lockr.js, this is just a library you can grab that makes it a little bit easier to deal with the local storage object. So if you look for that, it's right there on GitHub, along with all of the documentation. Very easy to use and easy to find. All you need from this is the lockr.js JavaScript file and then the README to understand how it works. So I downloaded that and I included it. So here's our lockr.js, again, code I did not write. So all of that's included here in the head. Down at the bottom, to make sure all of the components loaded first, right? I wanted all of my actual Onsen components and form components, etc. to load. Then I loaded my to-do JavaScript, which is all the JavaScript I wrote to make this work right here. Okay, so in between here, we have our actual components on the page. First, we have the Onsen page container, ons-page. Onsen actually has a page management feature. Now, I'm not really using it here because we only have one page to our app, but if we had more complex apps, like a master detail type of app, then we might have to have multiple pages or screens or states, whatever you might call them. And then we have our toolbar. So if we look at the app again, the toolbar is what's up here where it says to-do list. So that's actually formatted by Onsen to look like a mobile app, right? So we have our to-do list toolbar, and then we have our division that's got the text that I put in their to-do list. Then we have our text area, and the text area is where the user's going to input their to-do list item, right there where I'm typing. That's the text area. The text area has a class text area, and that's where I decided the width and the separation. Rows 3 indicates exactly how many rows of text it's going to hold. The placeholder is what appears in there by default. So you see where it says enter your to-do item? That comes from that attribute right there. That disappears as soon as the user starts typing in there. The ID to-do item lets me link this to the JavaScript. You'll see that in a few moments. But this actually links us to the JavaScript. And then max length 140 is the number of characters that the container can hold. We don't want to-do items more than 140 characters. Next, we've got our button. The button, I'm actually using 2 Onsen classes here. I think that's a typo right there. Made no difference. We're using button and button material to give it the look that it has. And the ID to link it to JavaScript is btn save. And then we've got our save text, which appears on it, right? The save text right there. So that's our button. And then we have our item display down here, which is simply this blank section. The reason that section is blank is because this text is all generated by the JavaScript. When we load the app, that text was generated by the JavaScript after the app loaded. The reason, of course, that section is dynamic is that it has to go into the local storage, retrieve the items, and then build the display. You'll see how that's done in a moment. So that's where the actual list of to-do items goes. We then close our ONS page. We load our script, and that's all the HTML. Pretty simple HTML here. So now let's go to our JavaScript. This is the heart of the application. And you remember before I said that we have to link our JavaScript items to our HTML? That's what's happening here in 1, 2, and 3, the first 3 lines. Let's go ahead and create a little split screen here. And I'm going to display at the top our JavaScript and then at the bottom our HTML. Let's move that right like that. We don't need much of the HTML. But you can see here, this is a constant. We're identifying it as btn save, and we're going to document get element by ID btn save. So that command, get element by ID, it does exactly what it sounds like it does. It gets an element from the HTML by the ID attribute. So we're looking for in the HTML something with the attribute, with the ID attribute btn save. So let's take a look here. And if we go down to our button, notice the ID is btn save. So that's loading the entire button element on line 19 into the JavaScript and essentially referencing it with the name btn save. To do item references the text area. Note that it's document get element by ID to do item. The ID here is to do item. So for the purpose of the JavaScript, we're going to call that text area to do item. And then finally, items display. That's the section where we're displaying our result. ID items display. Those are the only 3 HTML elements we care about. So inside of the JavaScript, this guy is to do item, right? Our text area. That's what it's called in the JavaScript. The button is called btn save, and then this area that holds our result is called items display. And that's again built dynamically. So since nothing in this app really happens until either the app loads or someone clicks the save button, we're going to write our code starting with when someone clicks the save button. Because when someone clicks the save button, there's a bunch of action. Right? We click save, that item is removed from the to-do list here, removed from the text area. It's saved in our list in the local storage, and it's displayed right here. So quite a bit going on. So button save, that's our button. OnClick is a function. And what we're going to do first is we're going to get the text out of the text area. So that text becomes to-do text, right? This text right here, where the cursor is flashing. When I click save, that text is loaded into the variable to-do text. I then send that text to the function store item. So here's our store item function starting on line 12. It receives as an argument the item. So that text that I typed there, change light bulbs, that is now passed to this function as item. Now, I create a variable called items, and I call the getItems function. Now, what that does is it gets anything that's stored in local storage, locker get items. So anything that's stored in local storage is then sent back to store item. So if there's items in local storage, they're sent back here, and then we're going to check. What this code is essentially worried about is if we have an empty list of items, it's got to function differently than if we have items on the list. So we need to check for that and react accordingly. Because if there's no items to list, then we're not going to populate the bottom part of the app. If there is, we will populate it, but also more importantly, we need to add the item that's being stored to that list. So either we're initializing the list because there was nothing on it, or we're going ahead and appending to the list. So this logic here says, okay, if there's items not equal to undefined and not equal to a blank string. So it shows that saying, okay, there are items that came back, right? Then we're going to go ahead and create our list of items by taking the list that came back that was already stored, adding a comma, and adding the item that was passed in. So what happens, again, if we look at the app, let's go ahead and add an item here, get oil changed in the Honda. So when I click save, this entire list at the bottom that's been stored is going to be loaded by stored items, and then get oil change in the Honda is going to be added to the end of it. And the list is just a list of these strings separated by a comma. So save, and now we reloaded the list with all of these items, adding get oil changed in the Honda. If there's only one item, then that is the list. So we're going to send either a list of items or a single item to save to-dos. That's the function that actually saves these to local storage. All right, so let's go over that one more time. When I click save, then the actual text I've written out of here will be collected and stored as to-do text. We'll then send that to store item. So pick up pizza for dinner will be sent to store item. We'll get the list of items down here with the get items function. That'll get this list of items. If the list is not blank, then we'll take the current list and we'll add the item to it right there. So when I click, we're going to get this current list. We're going to add pick up pizza for dinner to it, and then we're going to save that, send that to save to-dos with this entire list plus pick up pizza for dinner. So this is the entire list separated by commas. We're going to save that using lockr.set in a list called items, and it's going to have the individual items on it. I'm then going to pass it back to display items to display all of the items on the list, and I'll run clear entry. So we'll go over display items in a minute. That's going to display all the items on a list. That's what builds this display down here. Clear entry, which is the next function starting on line 28, simply clears the value out of here. So go running on the beach for exercise. So as soon as I click save, clear entry runs as well to clear that entry. That's easy, right? The to-do item, that's our text area. Its value is set to blank. Get items we've already talked about. That gets the items from Locker, right? Get items is used here to get all the items on the list. Now, by the way, this will return if there are no items undefined. That's why we check here if items is not equal to undefined. If there's no list, then undefined is returned, and we simply make the list the single item that was typed in. All right, so this is where there's a lot of action, because we're going to build this entire display based on the items on the list. So those items have been passed in as a comma-separated value, just each item separated by a comma. So the first thing we're going to check when the items are passed in here is, are there any items? If there aren't any items, then we're not going to run this because there's nothing to display. So items is not equal to undefined, and items is not equal to a blank string. So remember that the items came in as a comma-separated value list. Comma-separated value list is just each item separated by a comma in a large string. What we're going to do is we're going to make that into an array object so we can loop through it. And that's what's happening on line 40. We're taking the items, we're splitting them into array indexes using the comma. So item array now holds all the items as an array. And now we're going to create some output. So the list is formed from output that I got from the Onsen docs. So using UL class list and all this came straight from the Onsen docs. So we're going to make an unordered list with the class list, and we're going to create each individual list item based on the list. So now each item, as we go through here, this would be index 0, this would be index 1, index 2, 3, etc. in our array. So we're going to loop through one at a time. So first we're on array index 0, buy items to the game, right? So index 0, we're going to loop until we're at the length of the array, till we've gone through all of them, and we're going to count by ones. So for each item, we're going to create a list item that has the class list item and list item long divider. Again, that's just the look I wanted from Onsen. And then we have the class list item center, list item long divider center came from Onsen. We're going to append to that here the item array. This is the item. This is the text that came from the array that was made up of all the individual to-do items. So that's buy tickets to see game. Not sure why we have added a blank in there. I don't think that is meaningful. Let's put that back. Let's just try without that. I'm not sure why I did that. I think that was just a typo. Everything seems to work fine without that. All right, not worried about it. So here we're adding the item from the array, we're closing the div, and then we're adding inside the item here, inside the list item, the code that puts the little trash can and the delete. So we open a new division, list item right, on click delete item. So notice these trash cans that are here to the right. That's because we use the class list item right from Onsen, and we're adding to each trash can an onClick event, which will call the delete item function and pass it the number in the array of the item. So when we click an item, this time now, the first index will be passed, or the second, or the third, etc., whatever index these are. So if I want to erase return library books, I click it, and the appropriate index is passed to delete item, so it knows which one to delete. So that's appended right here into the string. And then this simply displays the trash can. I looked this up in the docs for Onsen. This displays the trash can. And then we close the division. So again, we made a logical division that's got an onClick, passes the number of the item to delete, and then displays the trash can, closes the division. So that's the entire list item, which is closed right here. So list item starts here, closes here. The list item has two components, the text and the trash can. The trash can has an onClick that deletes the item. So when we click on the trash can, then again, control is passed to delete item. Before that though, before we send this to our view, we close our unordered list because we've looped through every item on our list. We've created this output in HTML using the Onsen classes. We then close the unordered list, and then we go ahead and say items display inner HTML equals out. You remember items display is this section at the bottom. So that's what actually displays our items here once we either refresh or when we add a new item to the list. Record new videos. There we go. So delete is pretty simple. This is going to get the number of the item to delete. We're again going to get the items that are in storage. We'll store them in a variable called items. We'll again make them into an array. We'll have a new array, And then we'll loop through the items. And we'll add to the new array only the items that aren't the ones we're deleting. So for each item as we loop through, we'll test and see, is this the one to delete? Because if it's the one to delete, that value's been passed in. So let's say it's item 0, right? Then the first time through, x will be 0. X will be equal to item to delete, so this will be false, so we will not push it onto the new array. So let's do one here. So this is going to be index 1. We'll erase it. So what happened is when we deleted it, it made the new list by going through. First time through 0. That was okay, so that got added to the new array, the new items array. Next time through it was 1. 1 does not equal 1 is false, so that was not pushed onto the array. So we go through the whole array, we create the new items array, which are missing the item that was deleted. Then we simply pass to display items the new array, which contains all of the items minus the one we deleted. What join does is the opposite of split. It takes all of those array items, and actually in PHP, this function is called explode, but in JavaScript, it's called join. And what it does is it joins them in a comma-separated value string. So now we're back to the string. And we send that string up to display items, which will display everything. We send that new string minus the deleted item to save to-dos. That saves everything. And so now we have the new items saved minus the one that was deleted. So there you go. A pretty cool to-do list app using local storage. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. I'm Mark Lassoff.